And so this is an update on the C-CDA publication using structured definitions. So Gay and myself will be presenting. So we're just going to give you an update on the C-CDA IG, the ballot planning, as well as the CDA core, what's going on with that. So here's what we're going to talk about. So what is structured definition publishing? For those that don't know, we did talk about this in the April IAT, and then there's some projects all around this, and then give you a roadmap around C-CDA and the upcoming ballot in January. So what is structured definition publishing? Basically, we define the CDA structures are defined as FHIR logical models. So we're using the FHIR tooling and the FHIR representation. And then the templates are authored as profiles on top of those logical models. And both of them are defined using FHIR structure definition instances. Then we combine all of those templates into a C-CDA implementation guide, and work's been done to make the guide look just like the existing PDF. So we have all of the pros from the PDF and all of the templates are there. And the FHIR IG publisher is run on the IG and produces web content similar to the FHIR IGs. This is an across-the-board, with my TSC chair hat on, across-the-board initiative within HL7 to have all of the various specifications and IGs start to look, and have the similar look and feel. So if you're looking at a CDA, at the C-CDA IG, and I've got the specialty eye care one, I've done myself as in the same format, it's a different color scheme, but it looks like the FHIR IGs, and V2 is also looking at doing that. V2 Plus, I think, is very similar. So it's an across the board, and that's what this one is an initiative to take the CDA structures and the C-CDA templates and represent them as FHIR logical models. So there are 3 projects underway. There was a C-CDA and structure definition tooling enhancement project. So Trifolion on FHIR now supports the creation of CDA templates, as well as being able to upload sample files and examples. They're almost complete. The code complete. They've handed over the C-CDA. I can go to the next slide for that. They've updated Trifolion on FHIR. They've added the companion guide content to the IG. They've made a lot of updates. They still have some QA to finish off, but they've mostly handed off the guide to the next group, which is Susan, myself, and a few others at Dogwood Health. There's a second project that's just starting, which is to ballot CDA core. So those underlying CDA structures that are defined as logical models, they've been around for quite a while, but no one's actually looked at those structures to make sure they accurately represent CDA. So we're trying to do an out-of-core ballot. It'll probably be the October-November timeframe. And again, it's not changing the content, so you don't get to, the scope of the ballot is just to make sure that the representation of CDA is accurate. So if you have changes to the underlying CDA specification, that's not what that's about. That would be a different, there's a different way of making any of those kinds of requests. So this is just the existing representation of CDA, which is RIM-based and, model-based. Have we got it into the structure definition, and is it accurate? Are we missing, something, or is something not correct, right? That's what it is. So that's why we're balloting. This is basically, we want to make sure that this underlying CDA core is correct before the C-CDA IG is actually correct. Is actually balloted. And then the third project, the C-CDA IG update, is basically to ballot and publish a new C-CDA R4 IG. It's underway. So what's complete, the QA of the most recent template and examples. So like I said, Lantana had included the companion guide. So all of the companion guide templates and examples are included. And what's going on right now, the US CDI v4 design sessions, there were a whole bunch of STU and other comments, so 108 that we've started resolving those. There's an initial block vote of some of the triaged ones that went out for vote that next week we'll be handling. And it's all towards a January 2024 ballot, so balloting and publishing the guide. So this is what it looks like. So I'm going to just break out of the presentation to show you. Find the screen where I have it. Here we go. So there's the initial prototype. And the links are in the presentation. So this is the initial prototype. So again, all of the pages from the existing PDF are there, and for many of you, you'll have seen this back in April. Right, so background, design considerations using the guide. We now have the extra, all of the companion guide is in here as well, right? And then all of the artifacts. So all of those templates, right, are all in here, and they're represented as FHIR logical models on top of that CDA core. So if I click on one, say procedure note, and they're big, so they take a little while. It'll come up, and all of the constraints and everything that you would normally see are going to be, listed in the right hand side, but most of them are cardinality constraints or binding constraints. So this type code is fixed and things like that. So they're all of those constraints, all of the templates are here, right? And here are the different sections that are allowed in a procedure note. So this is the CI build, the continuous integration build. So it'll get updated every now and then. We do have Lantana's working in a different branch, and Dogwood Health is working in a third branch, just so that we don't clobber each other. So there is a, oops, that's not what I wanted. I did want the QA page. This is the latest and greatest. This link is not in the thing because it's changing all the time. But as an example, one of the for those of you who are keen on it, all of the diagnostic report document and all of its all of the sections and entries that are related to that, there was a ticket to get rid of that. So in this latest and greatest, the diagnostic imaging report is gone as well. All of the entries optional sections that had an entries required, those were to be gone. So those are also gone. So those are some of the big tickets we've already done. So we're already starting to prune C-CDA down to, according to the tickets. And then there's a whole bunch of small little tickets. I think so far we've got 27 of the approved tickets have already been done and applied. So eventually this will make its way over to the CI build, and people will be able to see that we're just doing a QA. The removing of all of the templates, took us a little while. It's tough. It cascades, right? You remove diagnostic imaging report, and then you got to make sure you're removing all the sections, but only if they're not used by someone else, and then you're removing all the entries and so on. And so we're making sure that it's still all there. So yeah, that's where we are in terms of the guide. So people will be able to go to the CI build and see how the sausage is made if you want, the consolidated CDA guide as it goes along. Any questions around that? Okay.
I've got one,
Sure.
Grijan. So under information, is that all the stuff from the volume 1 of the C-CDA main guide, and then additional guidance is all of the stuff from the C-CDA companion guide?
Yeah, exactly. This is information is all of the PDF from the actual guide itself, and additional guidance is all of the companion guide. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's the how to read this guide.
And this how to read is how to read this version of the guide to try and
That's helpful.
Yeah, to try and let people know what, what's different between the actual PDF and then what it looks like in this guide.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, we at this point, these pages are direct copies of what's in the PDF and what's in the companion guide. So one of the things will be, how do we, well, maybe not so much in the companion guide, but in the actual here, because a lot of this is referring to the PDFs and other things like that. So our team, I'm with Dogwood Health, so we're working on this. Our team's trying, anytime that we update, remove templates or update some of the constraints, we're making sure, or trying our best to come back in here and update, the examples and the text in here, but it's still very, PDF. And you'll see that actually in the companion guide. We've got an ongoing discussion around footnotes, because there's a bunch of footnotes that didn't make it over, and how do we represent footnotes, which work just fine in a PDF document, but in a web document, not so much, right? So something like this, right? So we're still working on those things.
No, it's awesome, awesome progress.
Yep, thanks.
And as we progress to ballot, there's probably quite a bit of narrative, what was volume 1 and what is the main guide and companion guide wording that's going to need to change
Right.
as we we are, well, that's the next topic up, but we are doing a new ballot of C-CDA in January, and so things can change.
Yep. All right, let me go back to the presentation. So yeah, here's the roadmap. Basically, we're down here in the second line, August, obviously going on to September. So, the publisher enhancements, imports of all that's all happened. We're getting the non-US CDI profile changes. So all of any of the errata, any of the STU comments that were made and approved, those are being added right now. The US CDI v4 design sessions have started in parallel with the US core, so on the FHIR side. And so then we'll be starting to add, once those get a bit further along, we'll be starting to add the templates that are needed for those. It goes to ballot with the January 2024 cycle, which means in December is when it's in ballot. So that's when people will be able to review it, make comments, right? And then after the ballot closes, and we've scheduled about 4 months to reconcile the comments that come through. And then the expectation is May 2024 is when the new version of C-CDA is published with US CDI and with all of the STU changes and everything involved. So that's the intent. We'll see.
I can't believe we've actually, from the first, we actually are still aligned with this plan and timing. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And we could actually take draft off of this.
That's true. Yeah. It's actually funny that you say that, Gay. I know Susan and I've been, obviously on the Dogwood team doing this. I keep thinking we're running out of time. And Susan goes, so you think we're going to miss November? I'm like, wait, that's 3 months from now. Well, maybe we'll be okay. We'll have to see.
It's a lot. It is a lot to do, though.
It is. Yeah. And then, yeah. So, I mean, again, for those of you who come from or know the FHIR side and the US core side, the expectation with C-CDA is that it'll be very similar. Right. So as US CDI versions are published, those things will be incorporated into C-CDA as well. Right. So, July, the new version of US CDI publishes. July to December, HL7 does a map and design process. Right. And then we ballot the new version of C-CDA, and then we publish it, and then we stop, and then you start again. Right. And for those of you who have been involved in the FHIR US core, right, that's exactly similar. And so it's a similar process for C-CDA now that we have a little bit more flexibility in publishing and balloting.
I don't think we really stopped, breathed, and started again. I mean, I don't think we stopped and breathed this year.
Yeah. But I mean, Brett goes away for 2 weeks and Eric takes a couple weeks off, and they don't think US CDI, and then they come back. So. All right. Yeah. And it is basically a continuous game of leapfrog, right? And the whole point of the SD publication, the structured definition publication, is it makes the updates more lean, right? So we have that ability to do the balloting that we didn't have before. All right. So these are your slides, Gay. So I'll let you talk.
So are the last 3 you did, but that's okay. So yeah, there's some of the boring ones, I think. Actually, click again. That's my one graphic for this slide. So we have we've always considered when we're developing, when we're going through this process of updating for a US CDI, the goal to try and align where we can between the development and the design that goes on in US core and the development and design that goes on in C-CDA. We were trying to formalize it a little bit more now, and especially since we're taking all of C-CDA to ballot, which has not been done since 2015. We've only done errata updates, and so there are things that we couldn't change. So now we have an opportunity to really focus on and try to do more alignment along with all of the other work that Jean and team are doing. And there's kind of two areas of alignment that can happen. One is in the value set space, so the terminology bindings to CDA, and the other is along within the profile or the template space. We're kind of leaning towards talking describing templates as profiles instead of templates as we're moving them into structure definition. But I think they're kind of synonyms. So anyway, so the areas are value sets and template / profiles. So we are some of the heuristics, and these are draft, and I'm sure we'll adjust them or they will change as we go along. But our goal is to use the same value sets wherever we can. There are a lot of value sets used in US core that are FHIR value sets and versus V3 value sets, and so those have some impact on when we use them within C-CDA. Some of them are US core uses a lot more value sets than are just built within the US core IG itself, and so there's different considerations when you're using those, and how can we use them, how can we point to them. Certainly easier in the structured definition space. One of the big considerations is CDA and the null flavor construct, which FHIR doesn't use, and so currently several of the bindings and the use of value sets are affected by that, because you kind of have to have two different sets in CDA, the null flavors which go in one spot, and the non-null flavors in the value set which will go in another spot. And we are having some thoughts around that. Potentially, if US core is using a data absent reason, which is kind of their covering for when there is not something, that we might consider using that, developing a value set. And we actually did that in the SEX template that was published in the companion guide 4.1. And so that because we don't want to go and change the whole null value design and constructs necessarily in CDA, but so that the proposal that we're thinking about now is, and that will probably go to ballot with, is in some places we'll do that where the data absent region is actually a member of a value set in US core. And then changing value sets, changing the underlying design, or changing the CDA design, the C-CDA design we can do, but on the underlying standard we can't change. So there's rules on the underlying standard that probably people kind of just ignore right now a lot of times, because they just look at the C-CDA document and do their development that way. But we want more feedback, and this is potentially a great place to get it on how big will be the burden if we say on the vendors where we're changing design to say, well, let's not use the null value construct here. Let's just include the like data absent reason values in the value set, and how big of a burden will that be? And then where we reference value sets, where sometimes we'll now can switch to using US core value sets directly where it's appropriate. Conversely, US core has been increasingly using VSAC, where the value sets are the same. And yeah, so that's you can go to the next page. One of the
I have a
things.
question.
Oh, sure.
One of the things that we started toying with the discharge summary improvements back in April was the use of subsections. And up until now, the only area where Consolidated CDA had really provided any guidance around using subsections was in the physical exam section, which was not a very commonly used section. And it will be now with the work that the specialty EHR project is doing, which will bring subsections more to the forefront, and with the discharge summary improvements that are being driven out of the community in Texas, it would be more of an issue. Have you guys done any testing, or have you played around at all to see how more common use of subsections will be handled by the new FHIR IG publishing tools.
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, you had that ability before. People didn't necessarily take advantage of it, and you still have that ability because the templates / profiles are the same. But we haven't really, I mean, because there aren't any templates that really, like you said,
Exercise,
take it,
yeah.
that
So-
exercise it. So we haven't really seen it.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we want to try and elevate, or any of the assumptions that we're exercising to get the improvements that are needed. We just want to escalate and make people much more aware of the things that we're seeking to do so that they can be incorporated more mainstream. And I think for both of the tracks that we have at the IAT, elevating the need to have implementers expect and not be stumped by or not be unprepared to handle subsections.
Right.
One thing I wanted to mention, and this is actually not related to your question, but I guess that's something we should test, right? To make sure we can do that, Jean.
Yeah.
But so you'll see in the title here that value sets is a hyperlink that goes to a value set, a spreadsheet that lists all of the value sets that are in US core, including, more than just the ones built in it, but also every single one that's used somewhere. And and then some columns to help assess whether or not we can reuse them in CDA. So it's just, and that's just, honestly, we have gone through 3 rows, I think, in there so far. So that's just something that we'll be doing as we move along in the project, because it's a pretty big job. And if there's anyone that wants to help, it's open.
Can you suck in the value set list that just got produced by the new value set update in NLM? Have that as part of the tab, one of your tabs?
Potentially, yeah. I haven't. It could be. I'm trying to keep it. I'm trying to avoid getting it really complicated. But I think that does seem to be something that we might want to do, rather than. I mean, it might make the job easier to want to reference it. Like for me, I just go right to VSAC and look at.
Yeah.
But if other people are helping, that certainly might be a useful tab to have. Yeah.
I think that'd be awesome. And it also has, because they have that nice high level page that has the ones that are not available in VSAC, 2 of them, and then all the ones that are available in VSAC.
Right, and just a little heads up about that too. There's they have a nice little hover over that says where they're available, and they call them FHIR value sets when they're in HL7 value set, and they're not FHIR value sets. But that's just a text hover over. So that's just something, a fix that VSAC has to do. So here's profile changes and considerations, heuristics, if you will. We had a thought that we should really remove tons of things if they're not used, and let's just align with whatever US core has. And we talked about that in the May work group meeting, and that was kind of like, no, let's not be too radical. And we also, then last time we talked about this, we changed it from, a box with stuff that's being thrown away to clarify that, well, it's not really being thrown away. Like, for example, if you're an organization and you use a template or a document that really pretty much nobody else uses, and if we would not carry it forward, that's still okay. It's still available for use. But anyway, some of the heuristics are that if it's if something is a set of templates or a template is not used at all, or it would require a lot of input to try and update it to what it needs to be, then we would consider removing it. And going into ballot, if people say, wait a minute, why'd you take this out? I use it, then we bring it back in. But an example is the diagnostic imaging report. And we're not talking about the template that is for, result observation that sends, that represents images. We're talking about this document that is very much a DICOM, an organization called DICOM focused, and it's like probably 8 years out of date. Value sets are just completely out of date. There's other initiatives to do DIR, and so everyone had agreed that we would take that out. And then just the other week we had some discussion where with respect to the procedure templates that are in C-CDA, and how there's procedure, activity, procedure, activity, observation, and procedure, activity, act. And nobody uses the observation in Act 1, or at least it's very low usage. And so we made a decision on a call that we're only going to carry forward the procedure, activity, procedure. So that's an example in how it will be iterative. So we're not necessarily going through and cutting everything up, but we're making iterative decisions like that. And an earlier decision had been made about the sections with entries not required. Yeah, and so potentially we might change within templates the underlying design to accommodate, for example, that null value. If we decide, okay, here's one where we're going to use the data absent reason values. So, yeah. Any questions about the removing of templates, or what about these heuristics? Really, it's not about the removing of templates, but about the heuristics of that can occur. Thank you. Sean is multitasking. So how to participate in an alignment is really on the design calls. If we would so much appreciate to have increased vendor participation in the C-CDA design calls, and to participating in both is great, is hugely helpful. I mean, in US Core, a lot of vendors, and I know probably not so with necessarily the folks on some of the folks on this call, but their teams are separate, like a team that works on US Core and a team that works on C-CDA. And so we actually, there's a lot of vendor participation in the US Core discussions and less so in the C-CDA. So we'd love to have you guys come, because we often have questions about, like, what are you doing in your EHR? Because our goal with US CDI and with new design is not necessarily, is what I prefer. Our design we used to do was often very aspirational, and now it's less so. It's more like, let's talk about what people are doing and help and get you to send it around. So participating in both of those, or if you can't participate in both, then choose your one to participate in, and we'd love to have you on the design calls. Those are the links to the information about the calls. But their structured documents meets on Thursdays at 9:10 Eastern time, and for the first hour, it's sort of business as usual. In the second hour, we do US CDI design. So please come. That if anyone attends the example task force right now, we're using that time to do the design. And not to say that if you have a particular example you really are needing help with, we're welcome to talk about that as well. We have some joint design sessions scheduled Wednesday, Q3 and 4 at the September work group meeting. So if you're attending that, please come. And then, of course, there's always ballot comment participation, and looking to get comments both about the ballot itself and also having thoughts about, does this work for me if I'm working on do I understand what I need to do here if I'm working on a project that's a transform from FHIR to CDA or vice versa? Questions about participation in alignment and design?
Yeah, you talked about the template changes. Are those going to be, is there like a place? So y'all talked about the how to read menu item at one point, and I feel like that's a really hidden gem. It's a lot of helpful information in there. Do you plan on tracking or tracking the history of things that have been changed as far as the template ID conversation that you mentioned?
Yes.
Okay.
John.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have a change log, so that'll show what we've done, like all of the tickets that we've applied, and what does that mean. So I don't know exactly the level of it yet, but I mean, obviously, removing the diagnostic imaging report and templates, that'll be in the change log. And whether it's down to the individual line items, so we changed this should to a may or something like that. But we will have a reference to all of the JIRA issues that we've applied, so that people will be able to see what's changed.
Yeah, very nice.
And we're sort of on the how to read. space, we're going to be talking at the work group meeting as well about creating a tutorial that people can attend on how to read. So not necessarily, you know, maybe alternative ballot comments and review the changes as well. We don't know quite what it's going to look like, but something that will help people adjust to this new space of structure definition publication. Next. So yeah, so some of the things. So there's the link there is a list of all the C-CDA templates, and something we could potentially talk about, or just as you're maybe participating in design and the march to ballot. Some of the things that you could look at if you looked at that CDA template list and then think, you know, gee, I've always hated this template. Nobody uses it. I'd like to, you know, I wish that would go away. Or this particular template needs to be, I wish that this would be really different because it's, you know, the way it's designed is problematic for me. And or, you know, I wish in this particular template that something was added or something that was removed, something should be removed. So I think, you know, just those kind of 3 basic questions would be very helpful in our march to ballot to determine what the community wants. And I think so. Yeah, so you feel free to have a look at that. And I think there's one more slide, which is just questions.
Yep. I'm just going to take. I didn't think of doing this before, but I'll take you guys to there is a dashboard that is available that shows the STU comments that were made. And so here's C-CDA STU dashboard. So it lists all of the different comments and where they are, right? So we've got there were 50, I don't know how, I can't remember how many, 42 something, I can't remember how many there were anyway that needed to be have changes. And so we've started, like the team has started moving, so we're down to 26. There's 54 that are still to be triaged to figure out what we're doing with them. So yeah, and you can see, you know, 264 that had been applied either previously in previous erratas or that have been applied in this new SD publication set. And then what are the kinds of, you know, how are they tagged? What kinds of changes have been happening and stuff. So this is a great dashboard to see if you want to check on the progress of how things are going.
Are you sharing that link, John?
I will, yeah. We'll get Susan has it, so we'll share the link.
Thank you. The other thing you can use that for is to make sure you're not logging duplicates.
Yeah, there's been a few duplicates. Yeah, but take a look and see if your ticket's already in there. So. Okay.
And you can add comments to existing trackers if it's really close, but you have, or if you have a differing opinion with the tracker for that matter.
Yes.
Yep, and you know, do keep in mind that the more information and help we get as we march to ballot, the better. But also, there will be the opportunity during ballot to request changes as usual.
I agree. The more John helps you, the better. The more.
The more. Haha. All right. Any questions?
You missed the animation of the famous leapfrog slide.
Oh, okay.
There we go. Okay. It's animated now. I like that. Very nice.
Yeah, and Susan put a link to the dashboard in the chat. So. Sorry, we have a new security system and it keeps going off as people are coming and going. That's why I keep standing up. All right. If there's no questions, we have a bit of a break. So it was a 15-minute break. We are 10 minutes ahead. So We'll do it now. We'll come back it's 11:05 Eastern, 9:05 Mountain. So 15 minutes is 11:20, and then John Demore will bring us through CCA to FHIR mapping.
Is sorry to ask this, but is Betty a real person that was just admitted?
I don't know.
Yep. Yes. Yes,
Okay.
Betty with ICARE.
Hello. Yes, sorry, I'm real. Betty.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Yes.
So Betty, change your name, rename yourself to your full name and your organization, and
Then people won't think you're a bot.
Yes, absolutely.
Nope. Yeah, I checked. I was like, uh-oh, we just have a Betty. Let me check. Yep,
Yeah.
there's a Betty.
Yeah, I don't know if folks that may not know if they don't always use Zoom, but it can be a target for bots.
Yes. Yeah. The waiting room is a pain, but it's useful. So
Yeah, no, it's particularly for HL7 because we have a lot of our Zoom coordinates on public
Yep.
web that the world can see. So, all right, so you want me to go at 11:20?
Yeah, you good with that?
I'm good.
Okay, good. You're flexible. All right. Susan, do you have some vacation photos to share? Mute.
Yeah, I'm challenged. Okay, I'm just going to take a very short break, and then when I come back before 11:20, I will start showing vacation photos. I'll be right back. I got to get more coffee. I really do.
Sounds good.
All right. Oh, gosh. So for those of you that are still here and haven't gone to get coffee like I just did and have a bio break, as they say, I'd asked, well, CMG suggested, and I think it was a really good idea, that we have a little bit more of a chit chat time in between sessions for this IAT. So just to, let people get to know each other a bit better. So what they suggested, and I we've done is all the presenters have been asked to provide photos of their vacation this year or whenever, doesn't matter when, it wasn't specific. So I'm going to show, now, not everybody took vacations. I'm among them that didn't have vacations, so I didn't have photos, but lots of people did. And also just for others, if you're not a presenter and if you've got some either great or not even great vacation photos that you'd like to share with the group, please just send them over to me and I will be happy to include them. I really enjoyed this because I think it's been great to just, get to see people in their different environments other than on the Zoom screen. Okay, so I am sharing this screen and I have newly got a second screen and I'm still not great at it, but it is what it is. So I thought we'd start with Jean. Are you there? Might not be. So what I'd ask people to kind of give a little bit of an update or a bit of a blurb bio on where they were with their vacations. Some people did that, not everybody did, but that's fine. Here, let me put this into display mode. So Jean, are you there or are you out of the room? Because I can't really tell.
He's not muted, but his camera's no longer on. My guess is he went to take a.
I'm trying to remember John's wife's first name. That would be a good question. John and
Barb.
Barb.
Good.
There you go. Okay, good.
Good one. Okay, so here, let me move to somebody oh, there's Joginder, you're on. I just heard you. So do you want to talk a little bit about this, Joginder?
Sure. We were actually just on a quick little vacation last week in Invermere, BC, which is near the Rocky Mountains. But we were told about a little place where they had painted turtles near where we just happened to be. So we went to this little pond or lake, and they had all these painted turtles just teeming around, and one guy was really neat. He kept, swimming around, coming to us, swimming away, coming back, looking at us, going back, coming back. It was really neat to see.
When you first sent the photo before you said where it was, I was assuming like you were in Hawaii or something. It seemed, I was surprised that it was in, like how big were these turtles?
I would say about the size of your hand.
Okay, interesting.
Did you feed him, Joginder, or he was just checking you out?
He was just checking us out, though I guess people do feed them. We were the only ones there, but we heard people do feed them, but they were just kind of checking us out, and we were just kind of looking at them, looking at us.
Lovely. All right. Let's move. I'm going to move over to, there's Dee Dee. Dee Dee, you're with us right now, right?
I am.
I love this picture of you, and I assume your husband, Dee Dee. So.
Yes, that's my husband, Don. We're about to celebrate our 34th wedding anniversary next month, in fact.
My goodness, congratulations.
So we found a little gem of an island in the Bahamas, actually last year. So I will admit that this is the second time I've been, and he and I have never been to the same island 2 times in a row. So we just fell in love with it. It's called Eleuthera, as you see spelled at the top, and it is in the Bahamas. It's a literally short, less than 2-hour flight from Atlanta, Georgia. So that gives you a little bit of bearings of distance wise. It's the westernmost island. It's a long island, long skinny island, about 110 miles long. The widest point is only 3 miles wide. So it's a long skinny island. And the top left-hand corner is a sunset, one of my favorite sunsets we had for the trip. And the one on the top right is my favorite sunrise. So we had sunrises and sunsets. That picture in the bottom left-hand corner was the view from our bedroom deck on the house we rented. It was waterfront. The beaches are pink sand. If you've ever been to the Bahamas, they are famous for their conch shells, the big shells that people can blow in and make noise or hear the ocean in. The pink inside gets all ground up and makes the sand a lot of pink. So it's pink sand. beautiful, beautiful beaches. Turquoise, that turquoise is real. That's not photoshopped. It's not enhanced. That's literally a picture straight from a Fuji camera. And then the one on the far right bottom is an osprey that it was so cool. So this island has, you'll see in the left, there's big tall pine trees as well as palm trees. And this osprey just kind of hung out, and just, it would be interesting because we didn't get it on camera too bad, but we actually saw it catch a fish 2 different times over the 2 weeks we were there. So that's a little bit about our vacation. We had a fabulous time. Like I said, fell in love with it. Now, one thing to point out, this island is not a real touristy island. If you like resorts and you like all-inclusive spa places and stuff like that, this is not the place you want to go. This is a laid-back local island. In fact, there's no rental car companies. You rent from individuals on that. So just beware. I'm not going to recommend it to those who want the fancy resort type of life, but if you like going down to a fishing pier and buying fish from locals and take it home to cook and like living like a local, it's definitely a place to go. So
Lovely. Well, I really like that. Yeah, looks great. Okay, so I won't show any others right now, but that's kind of what we're planning to do during the breaks, just to we've got some other great pictures. And as I said, if anybody wants to share more or share their vacation photos and you haven't already sent them to me, please do so. I'm Susan.Rand@dogwoodhealthconsulting.com, and I'll put that in the chat, and we'd love to see them because I really enjoyed seeing a little bit of, a little insight into people's lives that we don't get to normally. Well, we didn't at the last IAT. We were very business-like last time. So we're trying to be a little bit more, having just a bit more interaction.
I agree, and it's nice. Didi, what's the name of that bird again? It looks like an eagle.
it's an osprey.
Osprey. Okay.
Yeah, they actually, believe it or not, those eyes that you see in that picture, they have a second eyelid. They dive into the water. They literally dive bomb the water to get their fish.
I've
and
seen
the
those.
little eyelids go up, and it was so cool because he hung around long enough that we took so many pictures of him. We got to have, we did a lot of research on it. We learned more about ospreys.
Okay, so tell me about the feathers then. So when it hits the water, because I was always curious about that. When it hits the water, how does the feathers not get wet and stop it from flying again?
They have some kind of oily sheen on the outside of them. They don't.
That's what I thought.
When he came out of the water, it was a male and female. We guessed that they must have had a nest not too far away. But when they dive and they come back up, there's no water on them. It just kind of just trickles away. It literally, it doesn't stay on them. They're not wet at all. It's weird.
That makes sense.
Cool. Let's put the picture up again so you could see him. I hadn't noticed before these. Yeah, great eyes. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's funny, the second eyelid, it was like a grayish. It covered that big bright yellow. That was without the second eyelid, but when it came up with the fish, its little eyelid was kind of grayed, and we actually saw the eyelid come down. So that's when we go, wait a minute, what just happened?
Like built-in swimming goggles, right? Built-in swimming goggles.
It is. It's like we had goggles. Exactly. It was kind of strange. So I love birds. We're bird lovers. So it was pretty magical. So
lovely. So next break will be, we'll focus a little bit more, if the people are on the call, at least at the time. We've got a couple of horse people with us. So we'll show you those. All right.
We'll horse around a little.
Yeah, there we go. Good. Okay, it's time
All right,
for
John.
Demore.
Yeah, John Demore talking to us about C-CDA to FHIR. Mute. There we go.
I figured out where my camera was again. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, let me get over to where I'm supposed to be. Nope, wrong one. Okay. Everyone see something about progress on C-CDA to FHIR mapping? Or does anyone see? I guess not everyone needs to respond, just one person, John. And John, I mean, I'm the only John on the call too. If Jean and John are different, so I can be your favorite John too.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. Jean is just French for John, so I'm my favorite John.
Well,
You're my favorite. You're my favorite Demore. Look, I'll give you that.
the more the merrier. That is what everyone says. Okay. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks so much for having me here. I kind of gave a little bit of who I am, so I won't go through this pretty quick, but I've been dealing with C-CDAs for a long time. I guess it's like a decade now. Maybe I guess I first published on the C32 HITSP CCD back in 2010, so I'm a little bit more. I've done work on trying to get the C-CDA specs online, so that's why I was so excited to see the progress. Really great work by Gay and John and others at Dogwood that have been doing the work to bring that into the structured definition publication of that. So really excited to see that. I've published on things, and then I guess I present a lot for things. Why am I here talking about the C-CDA and FHIR project? Well, first, I think that it's a really important project. I think it's really exciting the progress that's been made over the past couple of years for it. But I think that it's also really important to say that I am not probably the only. I'm certainly not the only person, and I don't even know if I'm the best person necessarily to speak about the project, because a lot of hands have gone into to doing this work for it. So I'll have a list of names up here in just a couple slides for it. But just to say, this is not this is not John's project. This is a real group effort from lots of different organizations and people. Natalie and Jay and Benjamin and Chun, and a whole host of other people that have been working on this over the past couple of years for things. And Lisa was kind of essential with getting this thing off the ground for it. So just lots and lots of hands that have made this project, taken off. I was fortunate enough, I guess, to be the publishing facilitator, which is when they were looking to actually say, hey, we want to go and ballot this now. We started to get to a point where they could actually say they want to put this out there for the world to react to. I was the one who kind of took the work that had been done in spreadsheets and GitHub repos and turned that into something that that they could actually put out there for feedback, and they got a lot of feedback. So it was balloted in the May 2023 cycle, and we've got like 110-ish, 120-ish comments. We've already done a couple block votes, so we're making progress and chipping away at the ballot reconciliation for it. But I think it's really great, show that this is pretty important for what's going on. As people have questions as I'm going through the presentation, feel free to ask. So just pipe up or put it in the chat. I'll try to keep the chat window open on my screen here, just so I can see it. But why does this project exist? First slide just here, just like why are we doing this? And the real reason is because there's a lot of C-CDA, and now I'll speak from my opinion, not the opinion of CDA Management Group, not the opinion of any other organization. This is just John and More Informatics kind of speaking for it. But if you ask me how long C-CDA documents are going to be around, I often tell people that the decline in C-CDA documents is probably not this decade, maybe in the 2030s for it. But I think that we have a really, really long tail to this massive adoption of C-CDA documents that we've seen in the United States. So now Didi's on, and Didi, I know that you were just speaking because you were on talking about the Osprey there for a few minutes. Is the number 400 million right? A month?
400 million is right, and that's been consecutive for the last 4 months. So it's not just a blip; it's consecutive. The numbers just keep going up, and this is shared across the network of networks. Is a good layman terms way to put it. But CARE Quality is a governance framework that connects over 40 networks today in production, exchanging 400 million clinical documents. Now, that's not the patient queries to find patients. There are billions of transactions every month doing that, but there are actually 400 million clinical documents plus being exchanged every month across CARE Quality. And for those that may not realize, you may have heard the acronym TEFCA, the Trusted Exchange Framework and Common Agreement that the Sequoia Project is the recognized coordinating entity with ONC for. The CARE Quality is the public-private version of TEFCA. And if you read the governances, they're almost identical. So.
And that number doesn't count what's being transported via direct, which would be another very large number.
Exactly.
So,
and again, just between gateways. This does not include like what Epic Care Everywhere exchanges internally to their network, or Commonwealth internally to their network. This is just network to network exchanges.
Yeah, or even a patient downloading their own C-CDA. So this is like the base of what the number has to be. It only
Exactly. It's much more than that.
So I want to just, sometimes everyone gets lost in big numbers. So I just want to I want to take a big number and just say what does this really mean? So all right, 400 million a month means 4.8 billion a year. So when you count other stuff, we're definitely over 5 billion clinical documents being exchanged per year. In the United States, if you count every office visit, every ER visit, and every hospitalization, there's only about 1 billion clinical care encounters per year. And when you add in telehealth and refills and phone calls, maybe you get to 2 billion. But to put this number in just perspective, on average, for every clinical care episode encounter that we're having in the United States, we have multiple C-CDAs being sent to downstream recipients as part of that. Now, that doesn't mean that every single encounter has. It's said on average for it, but you just kind of do that. If there was only 2 billion encounters and you're doing at least 5 billion C-CDAs a year, clearly you're doing on average at least 2 or 3. That's just a lot. And if you had said to people, I think 10 or 15 years ago, when I started working on C-CDA, that's where we were going to be, people would have been pretty darn excited and be cheering a lot of success in terms of a lot of these things for it. But we don't often take that recap moment to say, wow, we got there for things. But that said, I want to do some other numbers here that I don't have on the slide. So if you take a C-CDA document, how big are those on average? Didi might have other numbers for it, but I've seen on average they're 200 or 300 kilobytes. And on average, when you turn them a C-CDA document into FHIR resources, you end up with probably 50 to 100 resources per document, maybe even a little bit more if you do the provenance for things. So, when you start thinking about how many FHIR resources are going to be existent from these 400 million C-CDAs a month or for things, it's a lot. It's in the billions per month, and you start getting into the tens or hundreds of billions on a granular basis, and it starts to get across just the scope of how much impact this project can make for things. Why are we doing things in FHIR when you say, well, wow, we achieved such incredible C-CDA exchange? Well, a lot of people are looking to use this data beyond that kind of core use case of the C-CDA exchange of care transitions, right? So, the data kind of pops there and people can see a document. So, even though EHRs have incorporation and, ingestion capabilities, a lot of people don't use them because they're manual. They're not automatically brought in very frequently. But once you want to use this data for secondary use, say that you want to use all these C-CDAs that are being exchanged for quality measurement of population health or for profiling risk of populations or medical research even, you might want a common data model. And if you're going to do that, and you're going to do that for lots of different data formats, you might be thinking about FHIR as kind of being one of those common data models. So such potential to bring this data from C-CDA FHIR. And there's some regulatory kind of momentum that's kind of pushing this as well. So kind of the second bullet on the slide here is just, in the United States, payers are now required to make member data that they have about clinical episodes or clinical information available to patients as well, or to the members as well. And that essentially is also pushing this conversion. So a lot of payers have basically had to take all these C-CDA documents that they've been collecting over years for patients and turn those into FHIR resources that are available as well. So there's kind of some regulatory push. So Matt's got a question in chat there, and Matt, feel free to just even pop up for it. On average, I'm seeing, and this is on average for me, working with some different vendors for it, 50 to 100 per it. So essentially, obviously you're going to have, at least a couple, right? You're going to have the patient out of there. That would be kind of a minimum. And as you go through the different sections, you're probably going to have some allergies or some problems or some medications for it. So on the lower front, the minimum that you might see in a document might be, 5 to 10 for it. But on average, when you kind of put it all together, that's 50 to 100 is what we're seeing. And one of the most frequent ones you're seeing that kind of are loading up that number, it can get really big. Obviously, it can be thousands per document when you have a lot of lab results. That's one of the sections that tends to be big. Medications also tends to be big. And then also, if you're not just getting the most recent, if you're getting all vital signs, that will be another one that kind of blows up that size for it. That's just an average for things. So again, any one document can be different. So now we have some regulatory momentum. We have some kind of context of the bigness of this challenge for it. But C-CDA, as we know, is not FHIR. So there's content differences, just differences in terminology. Gay was talking about earlier, value sets and VSAC, and one thing that I think that I have kind of internalized. I think that this has been a very constant discussion point as part of the project, is that lossless translation of content between C-CDA and FHIR is not really possible today using the common constructs. So of course, FHIR has a whole bunch of extensions, right? You can make any extensions that you want to be able to do for it. And if you want to take the content from C-CDA and stick it into a whole bunch of extensions, of course, you could get every piece of data that's in a C-CDA into FHIR for it. But what that kind of thing that I said, they're common constructs, but FHIR at its base, or what's profiled in US Core, is probably not going to be, actually, it does not say probably, in my opinion, is not sufficient to be able to have a totally lossless translation. So basically putting the stuff into FHIR means that you're going to lose some stuff. Now, some people throw up their hands and say, well, it's not perfect, so why do we even bother doing it all? And I'm a big proponent of the whole thing. Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Despite the fact that you can't have complete lossless translation, you can still have very meaningful translation of these concepts. And that's really that kind of that core is what's been driving a lot of the work that's been done on the C-CDA and FHIR project. So the project started in 2021. I actually do have a little bit of a timeline side up here for it. You can go out to the Confluence site, in the slides, you can get all the links for things. It's under the sponsor of it is Cross Group Projects, obviously because it touches C-CDA and FHIR, so it's a natural kind of cross group initiative for it. Structured Document Working Group, or SD, Structured Documents SDWG, is also a co-sponsor for the project as well. So I kind of already started talking about this a little bit. What this project isn't for things. One, it's not a lossless mapping, and the team wanted me to say the words yet for it. So I actually showed these slides to the kind of the larger group that's been working on the project. And the reason why I say yet is because obviously you can build out extensions, and if you build out those extensions, and conversely, when you're going from FHIR to CDA and back to FHIR again, if you want to have lossless that way, you'd have to have some kind of other new templates or other just kind of entry relationships to other things that might be hanging there for it. It is not impossible to do lossless mapping for it, but it's not the core part of this project. We have basically put out of scope to say that if it's not lossless, we're not done. We're just going to say we're going to get to a good mapping between them, maybe even a great mapping, but it might not be perfect for things. And to that not perfection also doesn't cover every edge case. Part of what we did as part of this work is we brought together a bunch of different vendors. So you're going to see on the next slide or two, all the vendors that are listed as part of this. And we really tried to have a consensus process. This is actually like, a lot of how the standard sausage is met, right? We're just getting together and talking about you did X and you did Y. Remember that, just because we haven't really published, or, now we've validated, but we haven't published yet our formal, HL7 guidance on this, that doesn't mean that people weren't doing this. People have been converting C-CDAs to FHIR for at least the last 3 or 4 years, to my knowledge, for it. But as part of that consensus project, sometimes we don't agree on edge cases for things, and we might be quiet on that point when we can't come to an agreement about what to do for it. But again, just because we can't do everything doesn't mean that doing something isn't pretty meaningful. In addition, the vendors that are participating in the project, some of them are developing open source transformation tools. So Google they have an open source engine for it. You can get to it from our Confluence page for it, or get to their GitHub repository for how to do the transformations between C-CDA and FHIR. Other vendors are also kind of playing around with some portions of it being open source or freely available online for it. Other vendors, it's completely proprietary. But the goal of the project isn't to come up with a tool. The goal of the project is to come up with the mapping, and then to basically say, hey, now vendors have some guidance about how their tools should be mapped. And if a vendor's doing something that's really against the guidance, there's something to say to them now that might actually not be right. We don't provide guidance on storing C-CDA documents on FHIR servers, and we really don't really give a lot of guidance on documents on FHIR, but we'll talk about how this sometimes gets a little bit confused because we've actually merged together projects here for a little bit. In addition, there are other things, and we've actually, as part of this work, looked internationally for things that are going on there, but we're not really giving a lot of guidance around CDA to kind of FHIR or base FHIR outside of the United States. The project was essentially scoped for how we're doing this to basically be, CCDA to the FHIR thing that we're trying to land to is US core. So we've had like a lot of discussion of like, should we be using medication statements in FHIR? And there's a lot of really good discussion around that type of stuff for it, but it's kind of a little bit outside the scope because medication statements not in US core right now for FHIR. So who we are, again, I want to just like emphasize again and again and again that it's really a lot more than me. I'm not even like in the top 3 of people who've contributed work to this. Benjamin has been incredible with working on a lot of the JIRA stuff recently. Jay was our kind of key person for working a lot of the spreadsheet work for it. Natalie has been the key person for bringing together all of the groups and the meetings and just keeping the momentum going for this type of stuff. Chun has led the last connect-a-thons for things. So again, I'm not even the top 3 or 4 people in terms of contributing to this. So this is really the work of many that I'm very proud to get to contribute to in a minor fashion for it. So here's the authors that are actually on our webpage that you can see here. And also we mentioned Deb Lonieski for it, and also other connect-a-thon and meeting participants. And then if you kind of look on the right-hand side, I just put all the vendors that have been involved in some fashion up the tops. These are ones that have actually done a transform or kind of participated in some of those transforms of conversion of C-CDA to FHIR, and generally have some open source samples that are available to show like what they took and what they processed. And at the bottom, just a lot of other people that have been involved overall for things. So how do we go about this project? I mentioned we've been going for a little bit over 2 years. I was not involved right at the beginning too. Other people were involved right when this started from the get-go. And this is one of the earlier images that they came up with like, how are we going to do this? And I'll show you a subsequent slide that shows you really more of how it actually turned into. What they thought that they were going to do is have a reference result, which is they would take a source file and they would give it to 2 different vendors. At the time, it was MDIX and Google. And they basically would have 2 different implementations of this. They'd compare it, they'd come out with some sort of mapping, and then you get a reference and a gold standard, and we'd kind of be done for this. So obviously there's a lot of things that you could kind of look at this and say, well, is that really going to work? Is it okay to just have 2? How many examples do you have to have for it? And what this really process evolved into over time is this is how I kind of characterize a lot of the work over the last 18 months, is that there's really been 2 different streams that happened. One is, I will actually, so I'll see if I can post that in just a few minutes. One is this abstract mapping. Essentially, people looking at every field that's available in CDA and every field that's available in FHIR and trying to say, where does this go? Does this have a home over in the other standard? If it's in FHIR, does it have a home in CDA? If it's CDA, does it have a home in FHIR? The project actually was, is scoped to be bi-directional. A lot more participation has happened from the C-CDA to FHIR side of it, because a lot of people have a lot of C-CDAs and are trying to get a lot of FHIR. And most of the people who have FHIR aren't necessarily trying to create documents off them, but we do provide guidance in both. So when I'll show you the tool or show you what we actually balloted here in just a little bit, you will see both ways. But essentially, there was a process that was one set of calls that became this abstract mapping of just saying, we got a spreadsheet, here's all the fields in one, here's all the fields in the other, can we match it up for things? But then we also had this wholly separate group that just started saying, we got a bunch of tools, and often a lot of vendors already had a lot of conversions that were going on. Let's just look at what we've got here. So I've kind of got the getting dirty with examples. I almost want a picture from like the dirty jobs of like, just getting in the sewers and kind of doing all this stuff for it. But really what this turned into is more like what I showed here at the bottom, which is like this diff experiment. If people have done diffs, it's like a way you can kind of compare code and like see differences for it. So we had lots of vendors just convert and compare and put them out in GitHub repos, and we looked at things together for it. And then we had discussions about what was good. And then we tried to take these 2 things when we actually wanted to ballot and join them together and mesh and make it one. So you'll see a little bit of that. I mean, there's a little bit of that 2 different processes that essentially came together as part of the ballot for what we've got for it. But I do think it was actually pretty informative to have this, because frankly, if you just work from examples, you might be missing a few things that are kind of important, even though not necessarily something you see very often. And if you just work from the abstract mapping, frankly, it can be really, really, really slow because you try to be comprehensive and you spend a lot of time arguing about things that are really just never exchanged in the real world. It was really a combination of these things that took us to get to ballot in really that May cycle of this year. So what have we done so far? May 2021, project was approved by cross-group projects. They had the first Connect-A-Thon track in September 2022. We had a Connect-A-Thon track in January of 2023. We had a Connect-A-Thon track of May 2023. Also the publication that went, or the ballot of the publication that went on in that time. And we're planning to have a track in the September Connect-A-Thon. Now, again, this is important for everyone to hear. I've never led any of these Connect-A-Thon tracks. So it's other people who've been leading these things where I actually have to be on another track. So I only peripherally participate in this one for it. So it's a really that cross group, but they've often had two tables. So there's really been a lot of different participation from different constituents as this. In addition to kind of the approvals and this, I mean, we developed some GitHub repos, and then we had spreadsheets. They started off as Google spreadsheets and, kind of migrated over time. And now we've got them hosted up as CSVs in the actual GitHub repo for it. Then also in the spring of 2023, when we were talking at end of 2022 and early 2023, when we were talking about where do we actually publish this, we get feedback from the FHIR management group to basically say, you need to put this together with the prior work that was called C-CDA on FHIR, which was really a different project that actually first tried to propose what composition might look like and how to basically start putting in documents in C-CDA into FHIR documents. So not what Gay was showing earlier about just the C-CDA, XML specification published using some of the FHIR tooling, but actually a composition using a version of a FHIR document. And that's a little bit confusing too, that we get pushed together with that. But I do think it does make sense, because over time, these things are pretty darn related. Of like when you're doing a document conversion of XML and CDA into a whole bunch of FHIR resources, at some point we're going to want to have the binding that happens with the composition for that as well. So that ballot happened there, and we had over 100 different comments, and we've kind of got a dashboard associated with it. So what was balloted is this link right up here. So we've got the May 2023, and then our current build, which does have changes. So it already has some of the first two block votes, some of the work that's gone into making responses to that. What actually got balloted was not everything in C-CDA. And I'll talk a little bit at the end here about where do we go from here? It was to say, can we take the patient information, in C-CDA world, that's record target, and can we take the problems and the allergies and the medications and immunizations, so kind of core PAMI, and then we got one bonus one. So we did the PPAMI, which is we added procedures on top of there as well. Can we get those core sections mapped out here? So we made great progress, and that's actually what's in the ballot for it. You'd say, well, there's some key stuff missing. There's some key stuff missing here, John. What's going on? We know that we didn't include lab results and imaging and observations and vital signs. And we got a lot more to do there for it. We've got other social history stuff to do. So we're not done, but we did kind of say that, again, having good not be the enemy of perfect here. We just basically said, or perfect not being the enemy of good. We said, let's just go ahead and publish something so we can show some progress, and note that we're going to have an update and publish more sections over time associated with this. So let me take a moment here. Actually, no, let me do one more slide and then I'll get us out to looking at this. So the background section. So, when you go to the C-CDA and FHIR, all the tabs across the top, only one of the tabs, the one that says mapping, is the work that we were doing as part of this project. We did edit the index page just a little bit because we wanted to show some of the new authors and show some of the new, just mention that the mapping was in the guide for it, but essentially almost all the work that we did was editing the things that are under that mapping tab. So we have a background of the mapping project, which tells you some of the history that I already told you here. We have two ways. So you see one way that says C-CDA to FHIR, and then one way that says FHIR to C-CDA, and we have the patient plus PPAMI for all of those. Then we also have a thing that's called structural guidance. Structural guidance is like the general principles that are going to apply across many different domains. So when you're taking a code or a value with a codable concept, or sorry, value with XSI type of CD in C-CDA, and you're converting that into a codable concept in FHIR, it's going to be the same principles over and over and over again, whether you're doing an allergy or a lab result or a vital sign. So we want to basically have some structural guidance that we can kind of give generically across there. So you see that in the structural guidance ones. Then we have terminology maps. As I mentioned, C-CDA and FHIR use different terminologies. In our terminology maps, we're really focusing on the AHL7 or the internal terminologies for translating between concepts, not necessarily the big terminologies. What do I mean by that? Like, we're not trying to say take every SNOMED code and convert it to every SNOMED code in this other value set when it has 10 or 20 or 30,000 different codes in there for it. We're really just trying to say when you have very small subsets of like 5 or 10 or 15 codes and you have to go to a small subset on the FHIR side or a small subset on the FHIR side and go to the CCDA side, how would you actually make that happen for it? And then we have some known issues. We have some things that we know we haven't resolved here. So I'm going to just kind of show a quick run through of the guide online here, and then I'm going to kind of hit pause to just see if people have questions for it. And then I've got a couple more slides I can talk to if people want me to kind of go to lunch. I don't want to take too much of our time here. So let's see. So this is the build. So this is not the one that was published. Obviously, you can go and you can look at the directory of published ones, and you can see the one that was actually published here, which was the May one. So this one will be the May cycle one. But I'll just work from the build, which will actually kind of show the latest and greatest for things where things are. I'm going to try and zoom in just a tad here. No, doesn't want to let me zoom. Oh well. If I go to this mapping tab here. Oh, now it's letting me zoom. Okay, there we go. There we go. That's letting me zoom. Zoom does weird things sometimes. All right. If I go to this mapping tab here, here's the background. This just kind of talks about some of the key people that participated for it, some of the transformations for things, but doesn't actually give you too much about the actual transformations. If you're trying to go CCDA to FHIR, here you go: allergies, immunizations, medications, patient, problem, and procedures for it. And hey, note, we know that we're missing some things for it, and we plan to do those in the future. And you can see that information about what we're going to do in the future on Confluence for things. If you click into one of these maps, you'll get to see this table, which is kind of the core part of the mapping here. There is a little bit about what this actually does and how to read this stuff for it. But the core part of this would be the table. And then at the table level, what we'll do is we'll actually link out to the C-CDA structure definition. So this is great that I'm coming after Gay, because what Gay and John and the Dogwood team have been working on here, we're actually like linking out to that. Like, hey, here is the structure definition for Allergy Concern Act for things, and we link out to that. And then we also link out to the US core side of things on this. Here is the allergy intolerance for US core and FHIR. Okay, so we've actually got that. We were thinking about this as a very highly linked document for things. And then, this is the direction of C-CDA to FHIR. So you'll see, we take the ACT concern status code, and then we also take things within the allergy intolerance observation for negation indicators and IDs and effective times. And you can kind of just see, we use a little bit of like XPath type notation over here. And we use kind of the dot notation over here. So you can see dot identifier or dot onset date time or dot type and dot category for things. And this basically just tells you in a very simple thing of like, you got this field over here or this combination of fields over here, and it's going to go into this field over here or this combination of fields. So like when you have the allergy intolerance observation value, it's going to affect both type and category. But when you're trying to figure out the code for an allergy intolerance, you might need to look in both the participant playing entity code and also the value that's associated with it. So we talk a little bit about kind of the considerations that you need to talk here. And then on our transform steps, we have anything that's specific notes or things that are going to be those common repeatable patterns. So I mentioned like we're going to be turning IDs into identifiers all over these transformations and vice versa. So we actually have some things here for the C-CDA or CDA CDA ID to FHIR identifier transformation for it. So we have like some guidance here in a table, narrative format. And then we also just probably where most people will start and stop is saying, how do you do this? Like, how do you take CDA IDs and how do you get to FHIR identifiers? Okay, so if you get something where the URL exists, like, this thing here, and that's the Social Security Administration, they've got a URL. Well, then you go ahead, you have to take this and you have to turn it into that identifier.system. And then you take what's in the extension of CDA and you turn it into the value. But what happens if you've got something where you have a root but no extension for it? So how do you take this and how do you turn that into a system and identifier for it? And we try to kind of walk through all these use cases for it. This is actually shown from this page here. So if you go to mapping and you go to structural guidance, you'll get all of our structural guidance. It's kind of the general principles across sections of time and other things that we have here for it. But then this gets linked to, as I was showing here, from all the individual sections. So I kind of clicked on here and this kind of goes back to it. So having a pretty highly linked set of things here for it. I'm going to kind of skip down to the bottom of the table here and just say, what else did we do? So I mentioned those two different paths coming together. So one of the things that we had in our path was examples. So here's an example, here's highlighted, and it's just an image here, but we actually have the files out in the GitHub repos for it. Here's a entry for an allergy, and here's some identifiers and some highlighting of stuff here. And then here's how that turns into a allergy intolerance resource. So you've got an allergy intolerance resource, and you've got some identifiers here, and you've got some statuses, and you've got some coding for it. And you can just kind of see, how it turns from one into the other. So that's kind of cool that you can kind of get that little nice highlighting. I actually showed a tool that we developed for the highlighting back, I think, a year ago at an IAT. So I think it would have been like March of 2022 for it. But you can go actually access those examples that were just there in that image if we go off to these guys for it. But that wasn't the only thing that guided this. We also had that prior work that was done in spreadsheets and Google spreadsheets, and you can actually go see that, and you can see, all right, here was that original work. Now, this is a much more complicated table because it has like all the elements and a whole bunch of other things that we were considering and all these types of mapping for it. But you can actually see that from a historical perspective, even though that's not really our consolidated guidance. The consolidated guidance is what really goes into this table up here. So additional, what do you get here? I said that there were some terminology maps. So we think about this like turning the value of an allergy intolerance into a type in FHIR. So you might have to go and turn an intolerance into food is equivalent to the tolerance type. So you'd say, well, why isn't it food intolerance? Well, type is actually just allergy or intolerance in FHIR. There's only kind of two different choices there. So we have intolerance maps to intolerance. Intolerance to drug also maps to intolerance, versus allergies mapping to allergies. And then propensity to reverse reactions to substances. That was one where we kind of threw our hands up and said, is that allergy or intolerance? We had different vendors do different things with that. Right now we have it just as not mapped. So we're kind of a little bit quiet on that for things as well. So that goes through kind of the core of the terminologies, the structural guidance. As I mentioned, we got our known issues, so you can go read some of those for things. But I'm just going to kind of go back to here, and I can talk a little bit more about some of the nuances in terms of this, and I can try to go dig up that Google transformation tool. But any questions? I'll just stop here, and I've been going. Not too many questions have come in yet. For any questions people have. I put everyone to sleep.
John, you know what I was wondering, maybe to ask rather than just such an open thing, but maybe to ask how many organizations on the phone are actually doing some dabbling with mapping between CDA and FHIR themselves already, maybe outside of the context of this work.
PHIT is.
Yep. Linda's raised her hand. I can raise my hand for Availity, which I consult back to. They acquired a Diameter Health that does some of this. I know that Redox is doing some of this. I know the VA has kind of been involved with some of this. I think that Cerner has been involved with some of this, but if other people got their hand raised, they want to put that up or speak up too.
A couple of things I was thinking about, John, with this is you mentioned data model, and to me that's always I make the sign of the cross and back up, because we're not really saying that we want people to store their data as FHIR. We're saying, in my head anyway, I'm always saying, if you want to request data, use FHIR APIs. What you do in your back end is up to you. But from the sense of a data model, it's like as a query model, as a whatever you're doing, think of it as FHIR. The other point I wanted to make is there's still a huge need for documents. Payment and operations functions almost solely on the concept of documents. They think of them as charts, all sorts of use cases around that. And that's just from one perspective. I'm sure the same use case for providers when they provide data, not only to payers, but legally, et cetera. It's within the context of a document. And this work is not that, as you pointed out. We still need somebody, speaking as the CDA management group, we still need somebody to pick up that work and represent the CDA header using FHIR, so that then the C-CDA can be built on that same concept. So 2 comments, but the work here, just like the V2 to FHIR work, is incredibly important. We have to align these things, or we're going to end up with just a mess as we try to move this data forward and use it all in the future FHIR focused concepts. Now you know why, Matt, now you know why it's to Jean's chagrin that whenever I speak.
No, Linda, I think I'd like to underscore what you're saying, and it's not a single voice. There are many people out there that recognize that if this guidance is not provided and developed so that the industry has some anchor, some, I don't know what you would call it, a compass to guide with, we could end up in a place where lots of FHIR data is being moved around and nobody has a sense of being able to say what's right and what's wrong, and we'll lose our bearings.
And I will say too that the other great challenge that we have seen is open template, right? Because what you do with, I mean, you can get anything, right, in an open template, and how over time, some understanding of modeling, if it's an observation, that was easy, right? Go into the observation, but some of that modeling at a higher level insight. And I think from the work you do on C-CDA, that will lend itself to that higher level guidance.
Okay, well, I always like to give time. Any other questions that people have? Otherwise, I'll just do a couple things in the call to action. I can put out that tool that Lisa asked for.
Yeah, and John, your tool with the color coding, have you advanced that since the last time that you showed it? And is that a link that is available for people to utilize as well?
Yeah, and I've got a slide on that. I'll show that in just a sec.
Maybe a little bit more information about how to get involved if you're not already involved.
Yeah, no. Well, let me go. I've got a couple slides on the next steps and how to get involved more with this.
Perfect.
Let me put up this there. So this is the data harmonization product by Google Cloud for things. So again, I'm not saying it's complete, but this was, it's open source because obviously it's just out there in the web for everybody to see for it. Let me go jump through this here. So I mentioned this. We kind of went through one for allergy intolerance. If you want to look at the one for immunization, I've also got that one in the slide for it. We talked about the structural guidance and the ideas of like what repeats over time. Here is the ID one that we kind of ran through pretty quickly for it. So everyone's got that. And we talked about terminology concept maps. We didn't look at this one. This is probably the most gnarly one, which is data absent reason to no flavor and no flavor to data absent reason, which is like, the most confusing thing, and the thing that we've talked about the most with this map is the first one that you'll see here is that unknown does not go to unknown. Some people have said it should, but that's actually not really how unknown is used in FHIR and data absent reason versus how UNC is used in the CDA world for it. So, we've kind of had some terminology discussions that come out here for it. So Lisa was asking about this one. So thanks for priming me up, Lisa. If you go to C-CDA online, so hopefully this is still working right now. Let me go plop this in here and we'll have 5 people go to it and then it will break, I'm sure. But if you go to that, I don't know if that, hopefully you can copy. Can you click that? I think you can click that from Zoom for it. Okay, let me go click on this guy here.
No, that just ended up being
an image.
Old text, yeah.
What happened with that? Try this one. Oh, now you can click that. Okay. Go here. All right, there you go. So here's our FHIR visualizer tool. How do you use this? Again, we showed this back at the about a year ago. We did make a couple tweaks to it, but we haven't really. We've got more stuff that we know we want to do to it, Lisa. Like we want to add more examples. We want to also make it so you can have multiple FHIR resources rather than just one, because we think you're going to need that for provenance and some other things for it. But let me just show you how it kind of works. First, you can go put in your own example. So if you've got content here that you want to do, you can go put it in. But if you hit load example here, it will load analogy or immunization one for it. Key thing here with this tool, this is not a transformation tool. This just highlights it. So it just makes it easy for you to see. If you say, well, I have a CDA one and I want to go turn it into FHIR, you got to use Google or another tool. And there's some other ones. I think Health Samurai has one out there in 8box, and there's a few other ones that are available online that you can play around with. Not all of them necessarily fall over mappings for it, but you can kind of use a couple of these guys. And we've obviously looked at that as part of the project. If you do have a mapping, so you have an entry here and you've got a resource over here, you can submit this code, and then what it does is it just goes through this, XML. And it has to be JSON for the FHIR, and goes through this FHIR, and then it just kind of does the highlighting. So you can kind of see it's basically just kind of some regular expressions matching, but it has a little bit of intelligence baked in there. So you can see, this SNOMED code turned into this code over here, and this code system turned into this URL, because obviously that's what happens, right? You should not be putting an OID as your system for SNOMED or LOINC or a lot of those common things in FHIR for it. So hopefully people can play around with that, and I'm sure it's probably broken because I built it here. The only thing I'd say is that if you do this, you have to close this one before you do another one. So if I want to do the immunization one here, then I have to close that first one. If I try to do it again, it just won't work. I never really fixed that for things. So that's the visualizer tool. So people can play with that. They've got the link in the chat there. Danger, again, the visualizer tool doesn't know about where things should go. It just tells you what it sees in one and where it sees it in the other for it. It's just a comparison tool for things. So I have to always put this big warning sign here. It's dumb. It doesn't really know. So what are some of the other issues kind of popping up here? And these would be great things that people want to take up in, the C-CDA Implement-A-Thon tomorrow. It's kind of additional work to do for it because we haven't worked out all this type of stuff for it. Converting narrative content in C-CDA to XHTML and FHIR, because they're not identical. They're pretty close, but they're not exactly the same. You got to do some transformations of lists and items and paragraphs and contents and style codes and classes. And you have to kind of figure out what other changes you might want to make for that. You have to kind of work through this.
John, just to stop you on that, I know it's not related to CDA, but I'm on a project for SPL, structured product labeling, that uses basically the same tags that CDA did, because it was V3 tag. And I've got Graham created a transform, and I've taken it and modified it a bit. But yeah, this is a big thing, especially if you do have people using a lot of style codes and content. In fact, like there's some stuff you can do with lists in CDA/SPL that you'd be like, why are you doing that? Like specifying button types or bullet types and things like that. You're like, oh my gosh, right? So yeah, this will be an interesting one of exchanging changing the markup into XHTML and back.
Yeah, if you got that tool and you can throw out a link to the group, that would be great. I'll record that and bring that back. I don't know if the C-CDA FHIR team, we haven't really gotten into this as much, so we've kind of
I've got some transforms. It's in an IG, so I'll find it and I'll put it in the link. Yeah.
Awesome. And then one of the other ones that's kind of a gnarly one, and I stole these from Benjamin Flessner. Did a huge session, 6 hours over 3 days for it on C-CDA to FHIR, and great introduction both for it. If that course is ever offered again, I'd recommend people go to it. But context conduction is another one that's a little bit gnarly, which is in CDA. There's this concept of that if you have something at a high level and you don't re-specify it at a lower level, that kind of flows downwards. So like, if you have a document author, they're assumed to be the author of all the entries unless you have authors for those entries for things. Well, FHIR doesn't make those types of assumptions. So you actually have to basically explicitly state provenance and things within each resource or pointing to the resource for it. So there's there's a lot of gnarly issues here, and I'm just kind of highlighting a couple of them for if people are interested to take them up and to come up with ideas here for it. So what can you do and how can you get involved? First, if you have examples, example mappings, particularly on things that we haven't done to date, would be great. So social history examples, the team is looking for. Labs and vitals, I think that they're open to as well for it, because those are things that are going to be coming up as once we get through our ballot reconciliation, we're just going to start in the other sections that we know we didn't do. What else can you do? Well, you can review, adopt, confirm our maps in your project, so you can document any problems that you see in the maps in JIRA. Obviously, we're a project, so you can go and FHIR and be able to snag that guy for it. How do you support our work? One of the few of the things that we wanted to ask the community here is, like, in your opinion, would the community benefit from certification of transforms or testing of transforms for things? What if HL7 funded mapping, alignment, and working to incorporate into wider projects?
Yes. Yes. Can we say yes on that right now and have Sarah Armstrong or whoever is here from the ONC make some notes to be thinking forward about regulating and certifying and helping the industry make sure that we don't run amok, and have some ensure, give tools to help us ensure that we're getting consistent transformations between CDA and FHIR. Do we have ONC people who could note that in their notes, that that's something to be thinking forward about?
I don't know if Sarah's still on, but we'll definitely take a note on that, and obviously we'll continue to give.
And maybe we can remember to repeat that, John. Maybe say there's a couple of things that came up during the earlier sessions when Ask the ONC comes up, so we bring it up again when they're here.
Yeah, I see neither Sarah nor Alex are on from the ONC, so they must have dropped off for a bit.
Support the continued alignment. So, like, all these accelerators and just work that's going on for it, support this. But if you want to actually get involved here, I'm actually going to go all the way back here to this guy and just say, if you want to get involved, we have really two key meetings that we're doing right now. One is our core meeting that is basically Mondays at 10 a.m. East Coast time. And then we often have a Tuesday 1 p.m. meeting. Oh man, that link didn't come through either. What is going on? I gotta go figure out what's going on here with my, try that one. That link, there we go. That link's good. So go to the Confluence page, you can see our stuff. Our meeting reminders come out under cross group projects, so you can go there to look at that. But the last thing I'll say here is, what happens next. We're working through block roads, going to get through ballot reconciliation. We're hoping that it's not going to be done the next few weeks, but hoping before the end of the year we might be able to kind of get through everything from that perspective, and then expand to other clinical domains. Again, observations. Everyone keeps asking. We had a lot of comments in the ballot saying, well, what about observations? It's like, well, we said pretty explicitly in our notes that we were going to get to it, but we didn't get to it yet. So observations and social history, planet care, and lots of other stuff for it. And also we're going to continue to take feedback from what's happening and what's working in the real world for things. So I hope that this was helpful. Reach out if you get questions. Again, I'm not I don't want to say I'm not the sole contributor. I'm not even the majority or the biggest contributor. I'm like, maybe in the top 10, but I'm not even in the top 3 or 4 for this project. But obviously I'm very proud of the work that they've been doing and happy to help in ways. And when I got asked to present here on this, I said, I'm happy to do so for it. So thanks so much, everybody. And I know I ran probably longer than the 45 minutes I was allotted, but hopefully 5 minutes earlier, then I can give 5 more minutes to lunch for everybody.
All right. Any other questions for John? Nope. All right. So yeah, we are.
Just a big thanks. Just a big thanks. If we had that virtual hand clap thing, we'd just do a big thanks for the whole team, not just John, but I think his company and his name is awesome. There's more to do. There's more to come. There's just more all around. More informatics needed.
There's just the more.
Good, John.
Just the more is what I always say.
John, are you going to be around tomorrow for the breakout session?
I will be. I have to go. I have a lunch that I have to attend tomorrow for it, but I will be around right off tomorrow, and then I'm going to try to jump back on after that lunch around 2 p.m. So I'm going to try to be here all day today and for a good chunk of tomorrow.
Okay. We might want to do some mapping stuff with you, or at least talk about the next step forward. I know you'll have a ballot that's coming, but definitely want to be involved there.
I would love to take some stuff and frankly, if there's other people from your team that want to work on some stuff, we can pick an early issue or two that you're interested in, and we can do some work on that tomorrow.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, John.
All right, we are at lunch. We'll make it 50 minutes, so we'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern, 11 Mountain, 10 Pacific. But please be back if you want a little bit early, 15 minutes early, because the CDA management group has a little talk. They've got a new member and they want to introduce them. So if you're back, I mean, no one has to leave their computer, but yeah, so we will be on break until 1 p.m. Eastern. Please be back around 12:45 for CDA management group's announcement. Thanks, everyone.
And if others are back as well, we've got more vacation photos to show, and including some brand new ones too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So Dave, I'm going to stop the recording, I think, and we can start it after lunch.
Yep, I was thinking that same thing.